Hi, and welcome back to the ongoing Bandit Headlight project. So moving along, slow stages, cocking up, making mistakes, but really is a learning curve, and that's the whole point of the project. I'm not here because I'm a great welder. I'm not here going, yeah, I'm going to do this, I'm going to produce this fantastic headlight mounting. No, what this is a learning phase for me, learning how to do stuff that I've frankly not done before, and improving my welding, which damn well needs to be improved, because there is so much that you can actually do with welding, and it's one of the reasons that I'm loving Mackie Bass's current Yamaha project, his XV500, 750, I don't remember, because he's just showing what you can do, and frankly a welder is really what you need. If you're going to play and have a project, you really need a welder, and you need to be able to use it, because it just opens up so much. I'm not talking about semi-major projects such as I'm doing, or building a major back end of the bike. It's just adding a little bracket on, you know, just tacking a bracket onto a bike where you need one. This sort of stuff, it's right. So first thing we have to do is measure up. You can see on this lower mount I've got two of these tube mounts bolted in place, and that's what the lower support brackets will bolt to, or will be welded to. So this is the top mount. So the first thing I need to do is to actually measure how wide this is, and that's 20mm there. So what I need now is a spacer 20mm wide. So let's go find something. Right, the bolt's an M8, so let's see what we can find. So 3 nuts are 19mm. The washer, that one's a little bit over a mil. See if we can find a thinner washer. Yeah, that's still coming up 1.5 mil. It's 2. That's about 1 mil. Okay, 20mm, that'll work. Right, so let's create that baseline. Oh, that's not going to work. Right, this one has got a nut in the bottom. Okay, so this is our baseline. So from here it needs to branch out and hold our headlight like so. Now the question is, where on this spectrum will it go. Now when I had this welded on to here, it actually sat a little bit too close to this bar here, and looking at this, I think this is actually leaning in a bit, so this needs to be straighter. That can be, as long as it fits, it doesn't matter too much, but that's roughly where it's going to be. So I want enough room down here that I can actually rotate the headlight as I need to, so it will be about there. But now I need to build this out to here so that it matches and mates there, such that the headlight doesn't sit like this or like this even slightly. It needs to point dead straight forward. So this is why now I'm going to template it here on cardboard. I'm going to draw a center line up here. I'm going to measure the distance between these, see they're rubber mounted, between here and here, and mark that out on the cardboard. And what should happen is that a line from here to here, this distance should match this distance. At the moment I suspect it doesn't, which is why I think this will probably need to come back apart and be modified, but that's fabrication for you. Anyway, so that's what I'm going to do now, is do some measuring up and drawing up. And this confirms my suspicion that this is not in the right place, because it needs to be over here. I made this up without doing any measurements. I was simply getting it past the fork legs. This is the point at which it needs to turn, because this is how far the fork legs come when they turn in, and this is how far they turn in. So the fork leg occupies, when it's fully turned to the left, the fork leg occupies this space here, and it'll do the same on this side. So this is the right curve to get past it. but it would appear it actually needs to be another few mil to the right. Now it isn't very far. What I might do instead is simply change the angle of this so that this sits a little bit squarer, so that it actually is in the right place at the right point. At the moment this is all flat, which is the other thing, because when I first welded this in with the tube, in fact it was slightly tilted, so the tube actually was running uphill. So this is one reason I'm remaking it. So I need to cut these welds off and shift this tube so that it sits a bit further that way. But first of all I need to establish where the headlight's going to go. Right, so that's where the bottom of the tube that goes across to mount the headlight will be. That's one of these. Now these don't sit particularly square anyway. Looking at this, they're a bit kilted off to the side because this headlamp bowl is not made perfectly. I could get the hammer out and smack them a bit square, but I suspect I'd dish the bowl out if I did that. So I just want to confirm this again. Let's remeasure. And I can confirm these actually are not square, they tilt back this way, which is sort of helpful because if I twist this tube out it's going to meet this a little more square. But at the moment, actually that's even further off than it was before. Yeah, that's actually quite a long way off. I'm going to have to cut this off here, run both these tubes off and make a new longer tube, but this time I've got a template, so I can, when I cut the tube, I can lay it against this template and mark where the joint's going to be, which I didn't have last time. Okay, so let's cut these tubes off. mocking up the headlight. Now that I've tacked both sides of the bracket in place, now what I have come to realise, aside from the fact, that I haven't actually finished fettling this to fit, is that I've got my measurements wrong, and I'm out by about a good 2-3 mil each side. So as you can see, there's a gap there and there's a gap there. Now I reckon that's about the width of 2 washers on each side, so I think I'm going to be rather than trying to adjust all this bracketry, the simple answer is simply to space out the back end there, put a couple of washers in. Now I'm going to weld them in, because there's no way in hell I'm going to try to be slipping washers in there when I'm getting this on and off. That would be ridiculous. So the next stage is to correct the problem. Well, not so much to correct the problem, but to actually measure the problem. And it's largely down to the fact that I never properly measured this. I did it by eye. Now, as you can imagine, that this is not so easy to measure by eye. You can't lay it down on a piece of cardboard because it's actually recessed under the front here, so you can't just put it down on the front and then mark where the width is, and you can't on the back because for the same reason. And if you do it upright like this, well, you're trying to judge a straight line down from here to where you're marking, which is what I was doing, and clearly my eyesight's a bit skew-if. So what I'm going to do is I am going to try and get a better measurement of this gap, and then make up a bit of threaded rod the right width and bolt these to it, and then take it from there. But anyway, that's where we are. So, threaded rod. So it turned out my calipers were a few millimeters too short, so I've improvised with something else, and that is, I need to remeasure it because it looks a bit narrower now, but that should be the right width. It's really hard to tell looking at this, which is why I made the mistake in the first place. But I'm going to remeasure this and then measure the gap here, and then get some rod. With those lock nutted in place, I can now take the tube mounts off here, mount them on here, and see what fits. With a little bit more careful measuring and a little bit more grinding, I think we're starting to get somewhere. Turns out this only likes to sit one way up, the pipes are a bit crooked, but if it's flat in that one direction, it works. So I just remember I have to mount it on the bike this way up, which is, funnily enough, upside down compared to how I made it. But hey, well, they're flat in the plane of the table, which is what matters, because that's how they mount to the bike, and that means that it will be flat and level side to side. It won't tilt one way or the other. And if those tubes are hitting those lines both on the same side, it won't be skew-if, so it won't be like this or like this when it's mounted on the bike. Let's see how this goes. Well, I don't think I'm going to win any prizes for beauty or engineering, but it works, sort of. Well, it does, it works. What I need to do now is to weld those tubes up. They're a little bit distorted, they don't quite fit in exactly the right place, but honestly I'd be surprised if they did, given how cat-candid a job I did in putting it together. But it's mostly an exercise in doing stuff, in welding, in tubes, all this sort of stuff. It is just practice, and that's what I need. When I'm good at this stuff, when I've had some practice, I can remake this and do it properly. But there's a lot of stuff to learn, and that's where I am with this at the moment. So I'm going to have a bit more practice. I'm going to weld these tubes up. And then I'm going to see about putting in place the support structure, because at the moment it's just held on a single set of bolts, and if you do it up tight enough it'll stay in place. But there's a double mount at the back on the frame there, so there's going to be some support struts just come in, and then we'll see how it works and where I go from there. Okay, let's see what happens. Okay, so now those are welded up, indifferently well, but anyway, it's welded up and just quickly ground back. Some issues have become apparent, and whilst there are some variations in my welding such that these units are not exactly identical, when I welded it up it was pretty square. What I didn't take into account of, although I did sort of know about it, is that these mountings on the headlights aren't actually square, and in actual fact they sort of close in, and so that instead of being square to the headlight they're actually a little bit skewed in, and the end result of that is that there's quite a big difference here between where these two sit. And that's almost entirely down to, well, it's a combination of my bracketry and the fact that these are just nuts sort of pressed welded into here, and this really thin headlamp shell is just flexible, and certainly when I had it on the bike, you see these just want to close up like that. I mean, that's really where they want to sit. It's pretty much like that. So they're both skewed in, but they're skewed in at different sort of angles. So I'm not quite sure where I'm going to take that. I think what I'm going to... The problem is, if I put this bracketry to square and reinforce it so it sits square, the problem, and then try and force the bolts into here, there's two problems there. One is vibration against stress metal will break something sooner or later. The second problem is that if I distort this headlamp bowl by forcing this square bracket into somewhere it's not going to sit, it becomes very difficult to put this rim on. So it turns out that this headlight is not such a great buy after all, which is why originally I was trying to find a decent second-hand headlight and I couldn't. So I'm going to have a think about this and see what I can do. I think I'm going to have to go with making the bracket square and then sort of forcing the headlight to fit it. I think there's a limited amount of room I can room for manoeuvre I can do. One of the things I can do is to actually space these out a bit and then grind them at an angle, so that the angle at the moment this hits like this, where in fact the mount is like this. So if I can more closely mirror that, then these are going to sit better. But it's a little more custom than I was anticipating. Anyway, as I say, I need to give this a thought and see where we go with that. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys again next time with the next instalment of the headlight mount.